Hello friends, welcome back to the Roger Retrospective, where we take a step back from the headlines, go looking for deeper currents underneath them, history, geopolitics, and what I just call the human spirit. I'm Roger Horn, coming to you from under the blue skies of North Carolina, and yes, it's scorching hot here as well. This year is the 250th anniversary of American independence, the quincentennial, and as the fireworks go up this 4th of July, I keep coming back to one question. What actually is this country? Because I don't think it's a bigger, louder version of Europe that never quite grew up. I think it was never meant to be that, never meant to be Europe at all. I think it was meant to be something else entirely. And 250 years later, we're still arguing over whether that was a good thing or not. I say yes. Today, happy 250th, why America was never meant to be Europe anyway. We're going to talk about the great misunderstanding Europe has had about the U.S., as we've been discussing the last couple of weeks, then and now. We're going to go back to the frontier, watch a generally new kind of person get built out of raw material nobody in London or Paris expected. We're going to end with what I think America's real, honest-to-God natural resource, not oil, not land, optimism. Grab a drink, let's go back. So 250 years ago, a group of men who knew exactly what they were risking put their names on a document that said something no government on earth had ever built its foundation on before, that all men are created equal, endowed with unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Not subjects, citizens, not born into a place in line, free to build one. Now, I spent the better part of my career in global finance, emerging markets, Europe, Asia, Latin America. It's put me into more than 50 countries at this point. Sao Paulo trading floors, Mexico City, villages in Syria before the war made that impossible. That was great. Temples in Thailand and Bali. Seen a lot of the world. I like it. But there's a pattern that I've noticed that never gets old, because it repeats itself every single year. The rest of the world, and Europe especially, keep looking at America like it's a distorted mirror of itself. Louder, bigger, a little unruly, unsafe. Basically Europe with just worse manners. And lately, social media has turned that misunderstanding onto its head, which has been very nice to see. The European posting after first U.S. visit, wait, they're actually friendly? Why is the cashier my best friend now? Threads about our portion sizes, yeah, it's kind of bad. Our relentless, slightly suspicious optimism, our habit of blowing something up, and just, isn't that incredible? Trying again. To a lot of outside eyes, it looks like we're a different species. I don't mind that. Here's what I want you to sit with. This is not the first time Europe has gotten us wrong. Not close. Go back to the 1770s. To most European observers, and certainly to the government sitting in London, the colonies along the Atlantic coast were outposts, extensions of the mother country, populated by dissenters, adventurers, debtors, people who hadn't quite made it at home in London. The expectation from London was simple: loyalty, hierarchy, deference to the old order, same as anywhere else in the empire. What they got instead was unruly, innovative, stubbornly, infuriatingly independent, and it caught them completely off guard. Because the colonies were never actually built to replicate Europe. Geography alone made that impossible. You had a vast, largely untamed continent in front of you. Brutal winters, dense forest, a frontier that didn't care what your father did for a living back in Kent or Bavaria. It demanded self-reliance, full stop. Or it demanded you didn't survive. And the people who crossed the Atlantic to face that weren't a random sample of Europe. English Puritans, Dutch traders, German farmers, Scots-Irish frontiersmen. They brought their traditions with them. But the old baggage got lighter with every mile from the dock. Religious pluralism didn't happen because some committee in London decided that it should. It happened out of necessity. Pennsylvania under William Penn became a haven of tolerance almost by default. Rhode Island, founded by a man literally banished from Massachusetts for his beliefs, Roger Williams, rejected the whole idea of an established church. So by the time revolution is brewing a century and a half later, you're not dealing with transplanted Englishmen. You're dealing with people who already have been governing themselves, at least in their mind, but it's been locally for generations. These people who are instinctively skeptical of authority sitting 3,000 miles away, we don't even like it 500 miles away, and who'd been shaped generation after generation by the plain demands of survival and by opportunity. That's the misread, then and now. Europe keeps checking us against the European yardstick. Sophistication, restraint, the kind of world weariness that comes from a much longer and much bloodier history. And the yardstick, now known as a meter stick, keeps coming up short. Not because we're behind, because we were never using it. To understand, we have to leave today's highways and airports behind, leave in the interstate, leave the departure gate, and travel back to a narrow strip of settlements along the Atlantic coast. This new kind of person was actually being made. So let's try to picture it honestly. No cathedrals casting 800-year-old shadows over your town square. No aristocracy standing between you and whatever you're trying to build. Instead, a frontier that didn't ask about your bloodline. It asked whether you could clear the land, raise the barn, survive the winter. That frontier wasn't just geography. It was a mindset. It ran on something close to equality of opportunity, not equity of outcome, equality of outcome. Nobody was promising that, but genuinely radical idea that a man could rise through what he actually did, not what he's born into. Land was available. Yes, we can go on for hours about that too. And communities out on that edge formed the way communities do when there's no one coming to organize them for you, organically, out of necessity. Religious pluralism flourished right alongside it. Europe at the same moment was still living with state churches, enforcing conformity, sometimes at the point of a sword. The colonies became something closer to a marketplace of faiths. Congregationalists in New England, Anglicans in Virginia, Quakers and Lutherans in the mid-Atlantic, Catholics in Maryland, a Jewish community in Newport, Rhode Island, actually going back to the 1650s. That diversity wasn't a grand plan. It was distance and necessity doing the work for itself. But it laid the actual groundwork for what became the First Amendment. And self-government took root in the most unglamorous way possible. Town meetings. They still are unglamorous today, by the way. Those New England gatherings where free men sat in a room and argued about roads, about schools, about taxes, then voted and lived with the result. Alexis de Tocqueville saw this firsthand when he toured the country in 1831. And what he wrote about it has stuck around for 200 years, for actually a pretty good reason. He said that in the township, the people are the actual source of power, and nowhere else do they exercise it so directly. Then layer volunteerism on top of that, because this is the part that genuinely stopped Tocqueville in his tracks. He wrote that Americans of every age, every station in life, every disposition are constantly forming associations. Churches, schools, hospitals, libraries, volunteer fire companies, built by neighbors, rolling up their sleeves, not by royal decree, not by a ministry in the capital. Personally, I served about 10 years with a volunteer fire company in Pennsylvania. Nobody drafted us, nobody in the capital city assigned us a job. A group of neighbors decided that if the town needed a fire company, the town would simply provide the fire company and be the fire company. It's not an abstraction to me. That's Tuesday nights, 2 a.m. calls, for me more 4 or 5 a.m., and people showing up because showing up was just what you did. What's great about it is nobody else was showing up except for other communities around you. But there's not some great army that's going to solve everything. It's the same instinct behind every barn raising, every mutual aid society immigrants built when they landed, with nothing but each other. It's not European-style reliance on a distant central authority solving your problems for you. It's bottom-up. It's practical. This is the word I keep circling back to, optimistic. It assumes the problem is solvable if enough of you just start solving it. Tocqueville had a phrase for the deeper logic. Self-interest, rightly understood. Not selflessness, exactly. Just the very practical realization that helping your neighbor today is what gets your own barn raised tomorrow. Put it all together. So a frontier that rewarded adaptability over pedigree, a religious landscape with no single church calling the shots, town hall democracy as a lived habit rather than a theory, and volunteerism as the default response to nearly every problem. And you didn't get transplanted Europeans, you got something new. Restless, energetic, skeptical of any hierarchy it hadn't chosen for itself, genuinely convinced that tomorrow could be better than today. Spirit that survives. And that spirit did not stay locked in the 1700s. It kept moving, it's still moving. So the frontier eventually went away. Historians generally look around 1890 is when the census showed that the percentage of people farming started to decline pretty bad. But it didn't stop this idea when land ran out. Reinvention, the second act, the convention that possibility doesn't require a fresh continent, just requires the willingness to try. Try again. Immigration's been fuel for that idea, generation after generation. Millions of people arrived with almost nothing but hope, learned a new language, started a business, built a life from scratch in a place that owed them nothing. My own family history, in that same light, both sides actually, the same immigrant drive, different periods from the 1700s on, until the 1860s. Showing up in different forms across the family tree. Entrepreneurship thrives on exactly that same math, because in this country, failure's never been as treated as fatal. Bankruptcy becomes a lesson instead of a life sentence. A startup that collapses becomes the thing you mention in the pitch for the next startup. This is a country where garages produce tech, and small, stubborn farms out-innovate entire agricultural ministries. And nobody articulated that outward-facing optimism better than John F. Kennedy in 1960. Standing in front of a country deep in Cold War anxiety and asking a new generation to do something almost defiantly hopeful. Go abroad, not as conquerors, but as partners. Share what you know. Build something with people who didn't ask you to save them, just to help. Thousands had answered the call for the Peace Corps, and what they carried with them wasn't a policy, it was that same restless, frontier-bred optimism, just pointed at the rest of the world instead of the next unclaimed valley. That's the actual through line of this whole episode, from a Puritan town meeting, to a volunteer fire company, to a kid from Michigan, boarding a plane to dig a well in a country he'd never heard of 6 months before. Same instinct, different frontier, every generation right up to today. Even in our worst chapters, Civil War, Depression, World Wars, all the social upheaval in between, we've come out the other side reinvented, and more often than not, stronger for it. As we had 250 years, I'd argue that optimism is still the resource that we haven't figured out how to run out of. It's what pulls people here in the first place, and what lets us fight like hell with each other in public, and still, somehow, believe the best chapters are still ahead. It's why we keep surprising the rest of the world, and frankly, ourselves. So this 4th of July, watching the fireworks, sitting with family, remember this was actually built, what it was actually built to be, not Europe relocated, a genuinely bold experience in self-government and the pursuit of happiness, running now for 250 years, and still, somehow, not finished. Happy 250th America. Thanks for spending this time with me.